Whispers of the Velvet Room. Some loves don't fade, they echo. Tonight, we listen to one such echo. Welcome to Bloody Chapter, where silence remembers. The Velvet Room wasn't a place most people found by accident. Hidden between two shuttered art galleries and a florist that never opened before noon, it looked less like a club and more like a secret somebody forgot to bury. There were no signs, no music spilling into the street, just a single red light above the door that glowed even when the city drowned in fog. People said the place was older than memory, that it had been a bar, a stage, a confessional, and sometimes, all three. When Adrian first entered it, he wasn't looking for anything in particular. He told himself he was only escaping the noise of his own thoughts, though that was a lie he'd practiced long enough to almost believe. He'd been painting faces for years, portraits no one wanted to buy because they all looked the same. They all looked like her. The girl who had once stood for him under the sharp studio light, bare shoulders gleaming like porcelain, eyes too alive to be contained in color. Her name was Celeste, and to him she was everything that existed between breath and silence. He'd loved her the way storms love the sea, violently, without asking permission. But storms always end. She left one morning with no note, no explanation, only a thin gold ring left on his easel. He kept that ring in a jar of turpentine, convinced that love, like paint, could be thinned but never erased. When he saw her again months later, it was at the Velvet Room, where she now sang on Friday nights. Her voice wasn't loud or sharp, it was a whisper that carried weight, the kind that made the room stop breathing just to listen. The moment she saw him, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Regret? Maybe both. They didn't speak that night, but when she sang the final note, she looked at him like a confession she wasn't ready to make. After that, he came every week. He never asked why she was there, never asked who waited for her after the applause. He only listened. The manager, a thin man with a silver watch chain, noticed his persistence and said quietly, "Careful. The Velvet Room doesn't give without taking." Adrian only smiled, because he'd already been taken long ago. One night, as the rain carved rivers on the windows, Celeste approached his table after her set. Her perfume, amber and smoke, wrapped around him like a memory. "You still paint?" she asked, voice soft, careful. "Only what I can't forget," he replied. She smiled, and in that smile lived all the unfinished canvases he'd ever ruined trying to capture her. They started meeting after hours, when the red light outside flickered out. She told him the Velvet Room wasn't just a club. It was a sanctuary for those trying to rewrite their own endings. "Everyone here is hiding," she said. "Even me." She didn't tell him from what. He didn't ask. Love makes accomplices out of cowards. Weeks passed, and she began posing for him again in a small rented studio above a print shop. He painted her differently now, not as the woman he lost but as the ghost he'd conjured in her absence. But every time he looked at her reflection in the glass, it shifted, blurred, as if she were never really there. He started to notice strange things, the way her hand trembled when he said her name, the faint bruise on her collarbone she refused to explain, the silver key she wore on a ribbon around her neck. "It opens the room that keeps the truth," she once said cryptically, eyes downcast. "But truth doesn't like to be found." He laughed then, thinking she meant it poetically. He should have known better. The night everything began to unravel, Celeste didn't come to the studio. Instead, a letter lay beneath the door. No envelope, only 3 words written in red ink: "Don't follow me." Of course he did. The city was asleep under its neon halo as he walked through streets slick with last night's rain. The Velvet Room's light was off. The door, however, wasn't locked. Inside, the air smelled of old wood, smoke, and something faintly metallic. Her perfume lingered, but faintly, like the ghost of warmth in a cold bed. On the stage, her microphone lay tipped over. There were footprints on the floor, 2 sets. One hers, one larger. They led to a door behind the bar that he'd never noticed before. It was painted black, with a small silver lock that shimmered faintly under the exit sign. And hanging from the doorknob, like a taunt, was the silver key from around her neck. His breath hitched as he picked it up. The door opened not into a room, but a narrow hallway lined with mirrors. Each mirror was covered in a thin layer of dust except one, the one at the end, spotless, reflecting only the red light from the hallway ceiling. As he walked closer, he felt the temperature drop. In that mirror, he saw himself, but not alone. Behind his reflection stood Celeste, smiling, though she wasn't there in the flesh. Her lips moved, but the sound that filled his ears wasn't a whisper. It was her song, the one she'd sung the first night he saw her at the Velvet Room. Except this time, the lyrics had changed. You painted me to keep me, now you'll stay to keep me real. Then the glass rippled, and the reflection reached out. He didn't scream, he didn't run. He simply reached back, fingertips brushing the cold surface until everything went dark. When Adrian woke, the world smelled of turpentine and winter rain. He was lying on the floor of his old studio, canvases scattered like fallen leaves, his hands streaked with crimson paint, or what he hoped was paint. The clock on the wall had stopped at 3:17, the same minute Celeste had once walked out of his life. For a long moment he didn't move, afraid that breathing might erase whatever fragile lines separated dream from memory. On the easel stood a canvas he didn't remember painting, a portrait of Celeste, but not as she was. Her eyes were open yet empty, her mouth curved in a smile that wasn't hers. Across the lower edge, in his own handwriting, were words that chilled him, for the one who sings without a voice. He stumbled back, knocking over a jar of brushes. The door was locked from the inside, the windows sealed. He could hear faint music somewhere beyond the walls, her voice again, whispering the tune that had haunted him for months. It was softer now, more like breath than melody, threading through the cracks in the air. He tried to paint over the portrait, but every stroke he laid only deepened the shadows, until her face seemed to move beneath the surface, eyes following him like an accusation. Days blurred. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, the studio shrinking into a maze of half-finished canvases that all led back to her. People came knocking, the landlord, the police, a gallery owner asking about unpaid dues, but he never answered. The Velvet Room, they said, had burned down 2 nights after he last saw Celeste. Electrical fault, they claimed, though no one found her body. Only a melted microphone and a silver ribbon fused to the floorboards. He laughed when he heard it, a sound that didn't feel human. Fire couldn't erase her, she was in everything now, the pigment under his nails, the reflection in his sink, the silence between heartbeats. He began painting again, not on canvas but on the walls themselves, covering every inch of plaster with scenes of her, singing, smiling, standing behind him with her hand on his shoulder. The neighbors complained of the humming they heard through the nights, a low rhythm that sounded almost like 2 people whispering in unison. Then one morning, the humming stopped. When the landlord finally forced the door open, the studio was empty. The walls were painted entirely black, except for one patch where the white plaster shone through, the outline of a woman, arms open as if inviting someone closer. In the center of that outline hung a small silver key. No one ever found Adrian. But weeks later, a new tenant moved in. He said that sometimes, late at night, he could hear a faint song echoing from inside the walls, a woman's voice and a man's, entwined like a duet that never ends. The melody was always the same, soft and mournful, ending with a whisper that made his blood run cold. You painted me to keep me, and now you'll stay to keep me real. The legend of the Velvet Room grew. Some said the building where it once stood was cursed, that anyone who loved too deeply would hear Celeste's voice on nights when the rain touched the windows. Others claimed to see a man in paint-stained clothes wandering the alleys near the river, carrying a frame with nothing in it. Gallery owners began receiving unsigned paintings, always depicting a woman with closed eyes and a faint smile. Under ultraviolet light, hidden words appeared beneath each image, whispers of the Velvet Room. No one knew where they came from, but collectors paid fortunes for them, saying they could almost hear music when standing close. In a quiet suburb across town, an elderly florist tended to her shop. She'd been there when the fire happened, saw the flames eat through the walls like hungry hands. Sometimes she thought she could still smell the perfume of the singer who bought white lilies every Friday. One evening, just before closing, she found a small envelope on her counter. Inside was a photograph of a painting, Celeste, framed by shadows, her hand outstretched. On the back, written in graceful handwriting, were 4 words, "The song never ends." The florist locked the door, drew the curtains, and swore she could hear faint music drifting in from the street. A man and a woman, their voices threading together like silk and smoke. The next morning, The red light above the burned doorway of the velvet room flickered on for the first time in years, though the power had long been cut. Passers-by said they heard laughter, soft and distant, and saw the silhouette of two figures dancing in the reflection of a rain puddle, one in a dress of shadow, the other with paint on his hands. Some stories end in truth, others in longing, and some, the most dangerous kind, never end at all. For Adrian and Celeste, love had been a mirror, and they had both stepped too close. What stared back was not a monster, but a memory too beautiful to die. Some echoes never fade, they just find new walls to haunt. This was Bloody Chapter. Until next time, listen closely, your reflection might be humming too.